Nobody can manipulate you, exploit your weaknesses, or control your trajectory, unless you remain blind to the ruthless mechanics of power that Machiavelli decoded 5 centuries ago. Most people walk through life believing the world rewards kindness, honesty, and moral purity. They wonder why others advance while they stagnate, why manipulators win while the sincere get crushed. The answer isn't comforting. It's strategic. Niccolò Machiavelli understood something the masses refuse to accept. Human nature operates on predictable patterns of self-interest, fear, and perception. Those who master these patterns become untouchable. Those who ignore them become victims. In this video, I reveal 5 Machiavellian principles that transform you from reactive target to strategic operator. These aren't motivational concepts. They're psychological weapons refined through centuries of political warfare, cultural manipulation, and social engineering. Most people will watch this and do nothing. But if you're part of the rare few who recognize that power isn't given, it's engineered, then watch until the end to discover how Machiavelli's darkest lessons apply to your reality right now. Setup and framing. Niccolò Machiavelli wrote The Prince in 1513 while exiled from Florence, stripped of power, and politically destroyed. From that position of forced observation, he decoded the brutal mechanics of how leaders actually gain and maintain control, not through virtue, but through calculated ruthlessness disguised as necessity. The book was so controversial it was banned by the Catholic Church. Why? Because Machiavelli committed the unforgivable sin of telling the truth about power, that morality is a tool, perception is reality, and strategic cruelty often produces better outcomes than compassionate weakness. 500 years later, his observations remain disturbingly accurate. The same psychological mechanisms he identified in Renaissance courts operate in your workplace, relationships, and social hierarchies. The game hasn't changed. Most people just refuse to admit they are playing it. This isn't your typical self-help content. This is about dominance architecture, about constructing an identity so strategically calibrated that others can't destabilize you, manipulate you, or predict your moves. If you've ever felt powerless while watching manipulators thrive, this will flip the script. I'll break down 5 lessons. Each one builds on the last. Each one reveals a darker layer of how human psychology actually operates beneath the comfortable lies we tell ourselves. By the end, you'll see people differently. More importantly, they'll experience you differently. Let's begin. Lesson 1. Strategic opacity. Never reveal your full hand. Lesson 1. Become unreadable. Control information asymmetry like your survival depends on it. Because it does. Machiavelli observed that princes who revealed their intentions, strategies, and vulnerabilities created predictable targets for enemies. In Chapter 18 of The Prince, he writes that successful rulers must be a great pretender and dissembler. Not because deception is inherently good, but because transparency is strategically suicidal. Here's what this means in today's world. Every piece of information you volunteer about yourself, your goals, fears, methods, timelines, becomes ammunition others use to manipulate, undermine, or outmaneuver you. Your colleague who knows you're desperate for promotion, they'll position themselves as competition. Your friend who knows your insecurities, they'll exploit them during conflict, consciously or unconsciously. Most people operate on the false belief that openness creates connection and trust. It doesn't. It creates vulnerability. Authentic connection doesn't require exposing your strategic position. It requires calibrated disclosure, revealing enough to build rapport while protecting the information architecture that keeps you untouchable. But here's the part nobody talks about. Strategic opacity isn't just about withholding information. It's about creating multiple plausible narratives about who you are and what you want. When people can't pin down your motivations, they can't construct accurate predictions about your behavior. This uncertainty forces them into reactive positions, while you maintain offensive capability. The psychological mechanism here is simple. Humans need predictability to feel safe. When you become unpredictable, not chaotic, but strategically variable, you trigger low-grade anxiety in others. They become more compliant, more eager to please, more willing to give you what you want just to reduce their cognitive dissonance about who you are. So when someone probes for your plans, your timeline, your concerns, deploy strategic ambiguity instead of transparent answers. I am exploring several options. Not I'm applying for that specific position. I'm managing it. Not I'm terrified this will fail. We'll see how it develops. Not I need this to work out exactly this way. You maintain optionality. They operate on incomplete information. You control the frame. If you're still watching, you're already ahead of the 95% who will never understand that mystery is power and transparency is exposure. But this next principle is even more ruthless. Lesson 2. Calculated cruelty. Strike once. Strike completely. Lesson 2. When you must eliminate a threat, do it decisively. Incomplete cruelty creates permanent enemies. Machiavelli's most controversial assertion appears in Chapter 8 of The Prince. Cruelties are well used when they are applied all at once and when they are necessary for security. He observed that leaders who inflicted harm gradually, repeatedly, or half-heartedly created lasting resentment and eventual retaliation. But those who struck completely, then immediately shifted to generosity, neutralized threats while maintaining stability. Translate this to modern psychology. You're in a professional relationship that's become toxic, a colleague undermining you, a business partner acting in bad faith, a friend exploiting your generosity. Most people respond with passive aggression, gradual withdrawal, or repeated confrontations. This is strategic failure. You're inflicting pain without resolution, creating an enemy who remains in proximity with motivation for revenge. Machiavellian thinking demands different action. Assess whether the relationship serves your strategic position. If it doesn't, remove it completely. Fire the employee decisively. Dissolve the partnership cleanly. Cut the friend entirely. No drawn-out process. No multiple warnings. No ambiguous half measures. Here's the dark psychology breakdown. Humans have a cognitive bias called the peak-end rule. We judge experiences primarily by their most intense moment and their conclusion. When you inflict harm gradually, every instance becomes a memorable peak of negative emotion. The relationship becomes a series of painful memories. But when you act decisively once, there's a single peak followed by immediate absence. The emotional intensity fades faster because there's no repeated reinforcement. Additionally, incomplete punishment communicates weakness. It signals you lack the resolve to fully commit to your decisions. This invites further testing, boundary pushing, and exploitation. Decisive action communicates something different, consequence certainty. People learn that crossing you doesn't result in negotiation. It results in elimination. But, and this is critical, Machiavelli pairs this with immediate generosity toward those who remain. After removing the threat, you demonstrate value to your allies. You're not cruel by nature. You're strategically protective of your position and generous to those who respect it. So when someone in your life has demonstrated they are operating against your interests, not through single mistakes, but through pattern, calculate the strategic value of their presence. If it's negative, remove them completely in one action. Don't argue repeatedly. Don't punish gradually. Don't maintain painful contact. Text the boundary once. Block if necessary. Remove access completely. Then redirect your energy toward relationships that compound value rather than drain it. Listen carefully to this next part. This isn't about being vindictive. It's about resource allocation. Your time, attention, and emotional energy are finite strategic resources. Every moment spent managing toxic relationships is a moment not spent building powerful ones. Machiavelli understood that successful operators protect their resources as ruthlessly as they deploy them. Most people will never do this. They'll maintain destructive relationships out of guilt, nostalgia, or false hope. But those who understand calculated elimination become untouchable because they've removed the very people who could destabilize them. Now that you understand strategic removal, the next principle reveals how to prevent threats from forming in the first place. Lesson 3. Fear over love, respect without warmth. Lesson 3. It's better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both, but the real power is in calibrated respect. This is Machiavelli's most famous assertion from chapter 17 of The Prince. He argues that while being both loved and feared is ideal, the combination is difficult to maintain. When forced to choose, fear provides more reliable control because men love at their own free will, but fear at the will of the prince. Here's what this means in your reality. People who depend on being liked make themselves hostages to others' approval. They negotiate from positions of weakness. They avoid necessary confrontations. They tolerate disrespect to maintain artificial harmony. Their need for affection becomes the lever others use to manipulate them. But here's the sophisticated translation most people miss. Machiavellian fear isn't about being cruel, aggressive, or hostile. It's about establishing certain consequence for boundary violations. It's about being respected, not warm, calibrated, not emotional, predictably protective of your position, not randomly volatile. When people know that crossing you results in immediate, proportional, and certain consequence, they self-regulate their behavior around you. Not because they hate you, but because they respect the integrity of your boundaries. This creates psychological safety paradoxically. They know exactly where they stand and what behavior maintains positive relations with you. The dark psychology mechanism here operates on loss aversion. Humans are neurologically wired to avoid losses more intensely than they pursue gains. When someone likes you, they gain positive emotion, but it's optional. When someone respects your boundaries through fear of consequence, they avoid loss, which is mandatory in their psychological operating system. Additionally, affection is emotional and therefore unstable. Respect through consequence is rational and therefore reliable. People's feelings about you will fluctuate based on mood, circumstance, and competing relationships. But their respect for your boundaries remains constant because it's based on predictable outcome, not emotional state. So when someone tests your boundaries, shows up late repeatedly, speaks disrespectfully, violates agreements, deploy immediate consequence rather than emotional appeals. Don't say, "I'd really appreciate it if you could respect my time." That's a request for affection-based compliance. Say, "When you're late, I leave after 5 minutes. Plan accordingly." That's a statement of consequence-based reality. The first negotiates. The second establishes law. The first requires their cooperation. The second operates regardless of their feelings. But here's where it gets darker. Most people think cruelty creates fear. It doesn't. Consistency creates fear. When people know with absolute certainty that specific actions produce specific consequences, they experience productive fear, the kind that produces behavioral modification without requiring your repeated intervention. You become low-maintenance dominance. Others regulate themselves in your presence because the cost-benefit analysis is clear. You don't need to be cruel. You don't need to be cold. You just need to be architecturally consistent about what behavior you tolerate and what behavior you eliminate. Emphasis on architecturally consistent. This makes you untouchable because manipulation requires exploiting emotional inconsistency. When you operate on principle-based consequence rather than mood-based reaction, there's nothing to exploit. You've removed the leverage points manipulators depend on. If you apply even this single lesson, you'll notice immediate changes in how people position themselves around you. They'll test less, respect more, self-regulate their behavior without your intervention. But this next lesson reveals how to amplify your influence exponentially through perception management. Lesson 4, Perception Engineering. Control the narrative. Lesson 4, Reality is negotiable. Perception is everything. Engineer how others see you with the same precision you'd engineer anything valuable. Machiavelli dedicates significant attention in The Prince to appearances versus reality. In Chapter 18, he states, "Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are." He understood that most people operate on superficial assessment rather than deep investigation. Therefore, controlling surface perception creates strategic advantage disproportionate to actual capability. Here's the modern application. You might be competent, strategic, and valuable, but if you appear uncertain, apologetic, or accommodating, people will treat you as low status regardless of your actual capability. Conversely, you might be average in skill, but if you appear confident, decisive, and high value, people will defer to you, seek your approval, and attribute authority to your statements. This isn't about fake confidence or delusional self-perception. It's about recognizing that humans make snap judgments based on microsignals, tone of voice, body language, word choice, response time, environmental staging. These signals communicate status and value more powerfully than actual credentials. But here's what nobody talks about. Perception engineering isn't a one-time performance. It's architectural identity construction. You're not pretending to be high value in individual interactions. You're systematically building a reputation ecosystem where the ambient perception of you, what people think before they meet you, what they assume about your capability, what status they assign you by default, positions you advantageously. The psychological mechanism operates through social proof and authority bias. When multiple people treat you as high status, others conform to that treatment automatically. Status becomes self-reinforcing. Your perceived value increases simply because others perceive you as valuable. This creates exponential returns on strategic positioning. Here's how this applies practically. Control your digital footprint. What appears when someone searches your name? Generic social media, or curated demonstrations of expertise and value. The person who appears to have valuable knowledge, interesting projects, and strategic relationships gets attributed higher status than the person with vacation photos and complaint posts, regardless of their actual capability. Control your communication patterns. Do you respond immediately to every message, or do you respond thoughtfully after strategic delay? Immediate availability signals low value and abundance of free time. Calibrated response time signals demand on your attention and scarcity of access. Control your association patterns. Are you seen with high-status individuals, or are you exclusively associated with low-status groups? Humans attribute status through association automatically. Strategic proximity to valuable people increases your perceived value without requiring actual achievement. Control your scarcity. Are you always available, always accommodating, always saying yes? Or do you protect your time, maintain selectivity, and occasionally decline requests? Scarcity creates perceived value. Abundance creates perceived desperation. So when you're building your professional identity, personal brand, or social position, think architecturally about what ambient signals you're broadcasting. Your email signature, your response patterns, the projects you accept, the people you're photographed with, the expertise you demonstrate publicly, the problems you solve visibly. Each component contributes to the overall perception structure others use to evaluate your status and value. Most people think authenticity means exposing everything. Machiavellian thinking recognizes authenticity as strategic curation, revealing the elements that serve your position while protecting the elements that don't. You're not being fake. You're being architecturally intelligent about what components of your reality you amplify versus suppress. Every successful person does this. The difference is whether you do it consciously and strategically, or unconsciously and randomly. The question isn't whether you're managing perception. You are. The question is whether you're managing it well. Now that you understand perception architecture, this final principle reveals how to maintain dominance permanently. Lesson 5. Strategic paranoia. Trust selectively. Verify constantly. Lesson 5. Assume self-interest drives all behavior. Trust strategically. Verify obsessively. In Chapter 23 of The Prince, Machiavelli warns against flatterers and yes-men, stating that princes must create systems where truth reaches them despite people's tendency towards self-serving deception. He recognized that everyone operates primarily from self-interest, and unverified trust creates catastrophic vulnerability. Here's what this means for you. Most people operate on naive trust models. They assume good intentions until proven otherwise, accept statements at face value, and feel cynical or paranoid when they question others' motives. This is strategic suicide. It places the burden of proof on violation rather than validation. You trust until betrayed, at which point damage is already done. Machiavellian thinking inverts this. Assume self-interest, verify alignment, extend trust proportionally to validated reliability. This isn't pessimism. It's probabilistic thinking. Most people will act in their self-interest when it conflicts with yours. Not because they are evil, but because they are human. The dark psychology here is uncomfortable but accurate. People will tell you what serves them. Your employee will claim they need more resources. Your friend will emphasize how much they've sacrificed for you. Your partner will explain why their preference should override yours. These aren't necessarily lies. They are motivated reasoning. The human brain excels at constructing narratives that justify self-serving behavior as moral necessity. Your survival depends on independent verification. Don't accept claims. Audit behavior. Don't trust intentions. Measure outcomes. Don't rely on someone's word. Create structural accountability that makes deviation costly. When someone says they are committed to your project, don't trust commitment. Verify through action over time. When someone claims they have your best interests at heart, don't trust sentiment. Verify through track record of sacrifice on your behalf. When someone positions themselves as loyal, don't trust identity claims. Verify through behavior during conflict. So when you're building teams, relationships, or partnerships, structure them with verification mechanisms built in. Financial partnerships. Independent audits, not honor systems. Professional collaborations. Documented agreements with consequence for deviation, not verbal understandings. Personal relationships. Pattern observation over extended time, not immediate trust based on initial chemistry. But here's where strategic paranoia becomes sophisticated rather than toxic. You're not treating everyone as enemy. You're treating everyone as operating from self-interest and structuring relationships so that their self-interest aligns with behavior that serves you. When someone's personal benefit depends on your success, you don't need to trust their character. You can rely on their incentive structure. This is how Machiavelli thought about power. Don't depend on loyalty, which is emotional and unstable. Create alignment of interest, which is structural and reliable. Make it beneficial for others to support you, costly for them to betray you, and transparent when they deviate. The person who operates on trust gets betrayed and calls a tragedy. The person who operates on verified alignment creates systems where betrayal is unlikely and detectable when it occurs. One is a victim of circumstance. The other is strategically protected. Most people will never implement this level of structural thinking. They'll continue operating on hope, good faith, and naive trust, then express shock when people act in predictable self-interest. But if you build relationships with verification mechanisms, incentive alignment, and outcome-based validation, you become untouchable because you've eliminated the possibility of invisible betrayal. You're not paranoid. You're architecturally intelligent about human nature. Now you understand 5 Machiavellian principles that separate strategic operators from reactive victims: strategic capacity, calculated elimination, respect through consequence, perception architecture, and verified alignment. These aren't motivational concepts. They're psychological weapons refined through centuries of political warfare and proven in every arena where power matters: boardrooms, social hierarchies, relationships, competitive environments. Quick recap. Lesson 1. Control information asymmetry. Transparency is vulnerability. Strategic ambiguity is power. Lesson 2. Remove threats decisively. Incomplete cruelty creates permanent enemies. Complete elimination neutralizes problems. Lesson 3. Build respect through consistent consequence, not affection through emotional appeal. Fear is reliable. Love is optional. Lesson 4. Engineer perception systematically. Reality is negotiable. Reputation is architecture. Lesson 5. Trust selectively. Verify constantly. Structural alignment beats emotional loyalty. If you apply even one of these principles, you'll notice immediate shifts in how people position themselves around you. They'll test boundaries less, respect yours more, operate more carefully in your presence. The question isn't whether these work. Machiavelli proved they worked 5 centuries ago. The question is whether you have the intellectual courage to implement them. If this resonated with you, like this video. It tells the algorithm that dark psychology content matters, and more people need access to these frameworks. Comment below which lesson hit hardest for you. Was it strategic capacity? Calculated elimination? Something else? Your engagement teaches me what content serves you best. Subscribe for more Machiavellian psychology, strategic thinking, and the uncomfortable truths about power that most channels won't discuss. This isn't feel-good content. It's functional content for people who understand the game being played. Share this with someone who needs to stop being exploited and start being untouchable. The Prince by Niccolò Machiavelli, 1513. Chapter 8. Concerning those who have obtained a principality by wickedness. Chapter 17. Concerning cruelty and clemency. Chapter 18. Concerning the way in which princes should keep faith. Chapter 23. How flatterers should be avoided. This channel explores the dark psychology of power, strategy, and human nature. Not the comfortable version, the functional version. If you're still here, you already understand why that matters.